Administration has politicized the Justice Department in an effort to expand its own power. Tonight, the department's almost unrecognizable Civil Rights Division. When the Civil Rights Division was founded in 1957, the Department of Justice filed hundreds of federal lawsuits to end discrimination in schools, voting, jobs, and housing. The division's attorneys even personally escorted the first black student at the University of Mississippi between rock-throwing demonstrators and gun-toting authorities.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
But since President Bush took office, the administration has turned the division against the very people it was designed to protect. Instead of pursuing discrimination cases on behalf of African Americans, the Bush Civil Rights Division has focused on supposed reverse discrimination cases against whites and religious discrimination cases against Christians. A Boston Globe investigation found the number of new attorneys with civil rights experience plunged from 3/4 to less than half. And of those who did have the experience, almost half had only defended employers or fought against affirmative action. From 2001 to 2006, not one voting discrimination case was brought on behalf of African Americans. The focus instead on voting fraud, which tends to help Republicans and disenfranchise minorities. Joining me now, David Becker, was a senior trial attorney in the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. He's now at the People for the American Way. And Alia Malek, who was a trial attorney in the Education section of the Civil Rights Division and has reported on the subject extensively for Salon.com. Thanks to both of you for coming on. Appreciate it. All right, David, what some people are going to say is they're going to say, look, in a new administration, they can do things in a different way. But this is way beyond that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Of course, they're right. Every administration has its own priorities. But here we've got a situation where you get different outcomes based upon whether or not it benefits Democrats or Republicans. And you also see a reshaping of the entire division based on a changing of the hiring practices, which now we've had loyal Bushies come out and admit that they were applying a litmus test to make sure they were getting folks who were politically reliable and not so much people who were experienced litigators or people with civil rights law enforcement.
That's a serious allegation, the notion that they're trying to sort of stack the deck against Democrats. How would they be doing it?
Well, for instance, in a lot of cases, redistrictings have to come into the Justice Department to be approved, particularly in southern states, because they're subject to a portion of the Voting Rights Act that requires it. So you'd see circumstances where redistrictings that benefited Democrats get very, very serious scrutiny. I was a lead trial attorney on one of those cases in Georgia. But redistrictings that seem to benefit Republicans, like in Mississippi or in Texas, would have a very hands-off approach, even though career lawyers determined in Texas, for instance, unanimously that the redistricting discriminated against Hispanics.
Ollie, let me ask, I'm going to show you some statistics. This, according to the Washington Post, racial and discrimination prosecutions declined by 40% under this Civil Rights Division. No voting discrimination cases brought on behalf of African-American voters. None. Number of housing cases has fallen from 53 in 2001 to 31 in 2006. I mean, the reason that the Civil Rights Division was started was to protect the rights of African Americans, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct, and that's sort of one of the things that's been a bit sad to see happen at the Civil Rights Division, is that at the same time they've dismantled the division, they've sort of eviscerated the meaning of civil rights and civil rights enforcement by taking up cases on behalf of people who arguably have recourse to politicians and to counsel if they were to pursue matters in court.
And David, look, it's also about religion, right? I mean, let's be clear. The far right have really hijacked the justice. You can talk about them hijacking the courts all you want, but when you're talking about the actual Justice Department, it's kind of amazing. You look at this statistic from the Rockefeller Institute. 1995 to 2000, they reviewed one case of religious expression of speech and made no investigations. 2001 to 2006, 82 cases reviewed and 40 investigations about religion in schools. I mean, this really tells us that they fundamentally changed what the Civil Rights Division does. It's no longer there to protect African Americans. It's to go after reverse discrimination cases and also to try and promote religion in schools and other public places.
You're exactly right, Dan. I mean, every administration has a right to kind of reassess priorities, but here we are on the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Division, and the Bush Justice Department is filing brief after brief in the Supreme Court and in other appellate courts advocating in favor of spending public money on religious activities. You see, during a time span of over 5 years where not a single case was brought on behalf of black voters by the voting section, a case was brought on behalf of white voters alleging that blacks were discriminating against them, in all cases, and of all places, Mississippi. Go ahead. I
think cases that are being brought under the doctrine of viewpoint discrimination aren't really civil rights cases. These are cases that are being brought to sort of lower the wall that exists between the wall of the separation of church and state. And that's not really what the Civil Rights Division was meant to do, and it's not what the civil rights legislation is there to do.
Who's to blame? I mean, this seems pretty clear to me that this is coming from the top. I don't think you can just say John Ashcroft is to blame or Alberto Gonzalez is to blame. I mean, it seems to me, Alia, that you've got to be blaming the people at the top.
Definitely, and this is the constituency that put this administration in power is who's benefiting from this litigation.
Let me play a piece of sound. This is from John Tanner, who is chief of the voting rights section from 2005 and to the present. He was trying to explain why maybe the real people to be concerned about when it comes to voting are elderly whites. Here's what he said.
That minorities don't become elderly the way white people do. They die first.
I mean, you know, he apologized for that statement, David, but it's a pretty amazing statement coming from the head of the Voting Rights Division for civil rights.
And it was one of those classic apologies where I'm sorry if you took it the wrong way kind of apologies. I mean, it's a circumstance where in this Justice Department, people who are both ideologically and politically reliable, but also people who aren't necessarily the best lawyers and most deserving of promotion, get into positions of this sort. This just represents the kind of shoddy analysis. I mean, he's completely wrong about this. It's the result we get is not only a partisan-motivated law enforcement protocol, but also it's just bad law, and we're going to get more of it. And you know, I was hoping that Attorney General Mukasey and the new nominee to head up the Civil Rights Division would move it in a different direction, but just today we saw a change.
I've got very little time, but the 45 attorneys hired 2003 to 2006, 11 hired from the Federalist Society, 6 listed Christian organizations on their resume, 2 hired who volunteered for the Bush-Cheney campaigns, 7 lawyers were members of the Republican National Lawyers Association. Again, some people are going to say that's their right to do it, but this has not been the way any other Republican has ever treated the Civil Rights Division.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And more frighteningly, there's nothing to stop the next administration, whether it be Democratic or Republican, from doing the same thing.
All right. This is a real problem, and you know, I've got all these statistics here that we haven't even been able to get to, but all right. Thank you to David Becker and Alia Malek. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. We're going to continue with this series tomorrow.